Hello my dear listener and welcome to our channel. I practically collapsed beside the car, feeling myself go numb. Blood was seeping from my wounds and I was pretty sure my shoulder had suffered some serious damage. My arms were covered in scrapes and there was shrapnel lodged in my back. Later, I would learn that this numbing sensation is common in the first few moments after being shot. The body takes time to process the trauma. The more severe the wound, the more time the body needs to react. I was losing focus fast as the shock started setting in, but I managed to move closer to her, locking eyes. She was bleeding just as heavily as I was. There were voices shouting, people approaching, but all I could see were her eyes. After everything, those eyes were all that mattered. Then, darkness took over, pulling me back in time. Families are peculiar things, like living organisms, no two are alike. The unique combination of personalities, ages, and perspectives makes each one different. Mine was no exception. My name is Harry, the middle child in what you might call a classic nuclear family. Martha my mom, Roger my dad, and the three of us kids. My older brother Greg was a burly guy, built like dad, while my younger sister Joan was petite like mom. I was the odd one out. With sandy brown hair and a slim build, I didn't look like either of them. When Greg bullied me, Dad would laugh and say I needed to toughen up. Life's never fair, he used to remind me. As we grew up, we did all the usual family stuff, picnics, park outings, but I always got Greg's hand-me-downs, even when they were 2 sizes too big. Mom just bought me belts and suspenders to keep them on. Greg and Joan got new clothes, I just had to deal with it. Dad was always hardest on me. Greg was his kind of guy and Joan was his little girl. He often referred to me as the mistake. By the time I was a teenager, they barely noticed if I was around or not. Mom showed concern sometimes, but Dad's life is never fair mantra always shut it down. Being left alone so much had its advantages. I poured myself into learning. I got into science, technology, and built myself a computer from parts I'd saved up for over a few years. School became my escape where I learned physics, chemistry, biology, geography, and history. I also taught myself English, German, and Spanish. I was like a sponge for knowledge, and with all the time I spent alone, I became a straight-A student. My teachers were proud, but at home, all I got was a weak smile from Mom and a grunt from Dad. Greg just called me a nerd. As I grew older, Greg's bullying got worse. He'd punch me, claiming it was brotherly love, and Dad seemed to encourage it. Joan would laugh but otherwise ignored me. One day, after a particularly bad hit, Mom caught me icing a bruise over my kidney. She held the ice there for a while and said, "Don't encourage your brother," but I don't do anything. I try to stay out of his way, but he always finds a reason to hit me, I said. It felt like I didn't belong in this family. Mom looked like she wanted to say something but held back. "I'll talk to your father and brother about it," she promised. "They don't think about how it affects you." A few days later, Mom must have had that conversation because Greg started coming into my room at night, punching me while I slept. Dad never said a word, but his expression, a sneering smile, told me everything I needed to know. I was bruised all the time, hiding it under clothes that never fit. I made sure no one at school saw the marks until one day, during gym class, I tripped. Someone thought it would be funny to throw a metal bar in my way during a prank, causing me to trip and tear open a gash on my arm. I was sent to the medical bay, where the school nurse, Mrs. Erskine, an older lady, asked me to remove my shirt so she could clean and treat the wound. "Harry, sweetie, it's okay," she reassured me with a kind smile. "I've raised 3 sons and trust me, there's nothing here I haven't seen before. We need to clean this so it doesn't get infected." I hesitated for a moment but then removed my shirt, hoping she wouldn't notice the bruises Greg had given me 2 days earlier. As she cleaned the wound, the sting was sharp, but after a few minutes I started to relax. She finished by wrapping a tight compression bandage around my arm. Just as I was about to put my shirt back on, Mrs. Erskine caught sight of the large black and yellow bruise running up my back. Her expression changed. "Harry," she gasped, "are you okay?" I tried to play it down, as I'd learned that being a snitch never helped in my family. "I'm fine, Mrs. E. I must have fallen a few days ago and didn't realize I hurt myself," I said, hoping she wouldn't press further. She didn't believe me, but instead of arguing, she simply nodded and let me go. What I didn't know at the time was that she quietly alerted the other teachers. They began watching me more closely, suspecting something was wrong at home. One unintended result of this new attention was that during my senior year, the teachers banded together to help me. Although I didn't realize it at the time, they had figured out that I wasn't being bullied at school. Since I had no social life outside of class, they suspected the problem was at home. But they couldn't intervene directly without causing all sorts of issues, so they did the next best thing. As the school year drew to a close, they helped me apply to several universities, making sure to recommend schools far enough away to get me out of my parents' house. My science teachers were instrumental in this. I decided I wanted to major in chemistry, and they helped me apply for scholarships. Mr. Daniels, my science teacher, took a special interest in my situation, and arranged a meeting with my parents to discuss the scholarship. A week before the submission deadline, we all sat in the school's conference room, Mr. Daniels, the principal, Mr. McDonald, my parents, and me. Mr. and Mrs. Other, Mr. Daniels began, "I don't think you understand what an opportunity this is for Harry. He's one of the brightest students we've seen in years, and he has a chance at a full scholarship to study at university." For nearly 20 minutes, Mr. Daniels went back and forth with my parents, trying to convince them of the importance of this opportunity. But my dad remained stubborn. "That's nice," Dad said, "but I'm not paying for the boy to go study. He needs to get a job and learn his place in the world." Mr. McDonald interjected, trying to calm the situation. "What Mr. Daniels is saying is that the scholarship covers everything. You don't have to pay a cent." Dad had no comeback for that, but it didn't take long for him to find another excuse. "Well, these universities are out of town, so he'll have nowhere to live. And again, I won't pay for that." "We've already thought of that, Mr. Other," Mr. Daniels replied. "I have a cousin who owns a business near the university. He's looking for someone to help out, clean things, and keep the warehouse tidy. It's not glamorous work, but it'll pay enough for Harry to cover room and board, along with a few basics like food and books." I gave Mr. Daniels a curious look. When he had told me about the job, it sounded very different. I would be helping his cousin in a research lab, working closely with the chemistry I'd be studying. But Mr. Daniels gave me a subtle wink and shake of his head, signaling for me to stay quiet. Dad thought it over for a moment. "As long as I don't have to pay and he learns about hard work, fine. It'll get the boy out of my house." "Excellent," Mr. McDonald said quickly, before Dad could change his mind. "I have the paperwork ready for you to sign." An hour later, everything was finalized and we went home. I couldn't believe it when 2 weeks later Mr. Daniels pulled me out of class and handed me a thick stack of envelopes. "You're all set," he said. "The admissions board has approved your scholarship, and my cousin Norman is looking forward to meeting you over the holidays to get you up to speed. Mr. Daniels, I don't know how to thank you. Just remember me when you make it to the top," he said with a smile. Then he paused, becoming more serious. "Harry, you're going to do great things. You're smart, hardworking, and you always put others first. All the teachers here know what's been happening at home. We figured this was the best way to help." I opened my mouth to defend my family, but he held up his hand. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything. Just know we've got your back." School ended at the close of year, as schools in Australia follow the calendar year, and I found out I had finished third in the school rankings. I would have tied for first if my parents had let me attend 2 extra credit school excursions, but once again I was denied. After school finished, Mr. Daniels arranged to pick me up to introduce me to my new job. On the way, he told me to call him Jack as he was no longer my teacher. We drove to the next city, which took a little over an hour, where he introduced me to his cousin Norman and helped me find an apartment. It was a fantastic 3-day trip, and I got to talk to Jack and Norman as equals, like friends. They listened to what I had to say and explained the details of what I would be doing. Norman had found 2 one-bedroom apartments for me to choose from, both between the university and the workplace. I picked the one closer to work, a well-kept apartment in an older building on the first floor. The building's superintendent was a kind older man who told me to call him if I needed any help. On the way back, Jack and I discussed what I would be learning, and I began to feel excited at the thought that life might have more to offer than just being ignored or treated poorly by my family. The evening before I left, my mother came into my room with several boxes and started helping me pack. "Mom, I can't take all of this on the bus," I protested. It's okay, dear, she replied. I spoke to your father, and I'll be taking you up tomorrow with these boxes in his truck. One trip and you'll be all moved. For the first time, I saw my mother almost in tears as she came over and gave me the biggest hug I'd ever received from her. Once her arms were around me, she broke down completely. Oh, Harry, my precious and beautiful Harry, she sobbed. You deserve so much more. I couldn't do much for you, but I do have a gift. She stepped out of the room and returned with a small box. Inside was a beautiful A4 notebook and an expensive-looking fountain pen. I would end up using that notebook to record ideas and discoveries in the years to come, and the pen always stayed on my desk. Don't tell your father, she whispered, but I wanted you to have something that's just for you. She trailed off, her composure starting to falter. To know how much I love you. She walked out, and I could hear her quietly blowing her nose in the hallway. At dinner that evening, not much was said. My sister Joan looked at me with contempt and muttered, "Don't be more of a loser than you already are," before returning to her phone. Dad sneered, "Make sure you find another big brother to help look after you," though I knew it was an empty threat. He didn't know anyone outside of our town. "Don't embarrass this family any more than you already have," he added. Mom said nothing, but her eyes held a deep sorrow I'd never seen before. The only other gift I got that night came just before midnight, when Greg barged into my room and tried to beat me up like he always did. I couldn't fight back, and as usual he laughed at me as he left. "So you don't forget your place, mistake," he said before walking out. I can't say I was unhappy to leave. The following year was incredible. I started learning about advanced chemistry concepts, combining ideas, and making my own discoveries at university. When I wasn't in class, I was working with Norman, putting the theory I was learning into practice. I studied as much as I wanted, and for the first time in my life I was earning my own money. Being away from my family for the first time felt like freedom, and I liked it. Jack visited often, spending time with Norman and me, and I got the sense he enjoyed hanging out with me. In my mind, he became the big brother I always wished Greg had been. I saved almost all my money since I never went out, and when I had enough, Jack helped me pick out a car. We talked about girls, though I was still too shy to approach that topic, and generally spent time together. The only dark cloud was that, once I had my car, I was expected to go back to my parents' house for lunch one Sunday a month. These family gatherings were mandatory according to Dad, and he demanded that I attend. Since I had moved out, Sunday lunches had grown, with an ever-changing group of people around my parents and siblings. It was almost humorous. My family seemed lighter, as if a burden had been lifted with me gone. Whenever I showed up, everyone looked at me like I was an outsider, though I was the reason they were all there. Most Sundays, people who worked for my father were in attendance, and I dreaded being in the same room as them. But as the dutiful son, I endured it. I'd sit quietly on the couch, waiting for the afternoon to end so I could go back to my life. It was during this time, while studying and working, that I made my first breakthrough. I discovered a chemical process that increased the strength and longevity of certain plastic compounds. However, when a specific inert and common compound was added, the plastic would break down into its basic components within days. When I presented my findings with Norman at work, he was absolutely floored. "You're a wizard, Harry. This will revolutionize our use of plastics globally, and make everything much more environmentally friendly." Over the next week, we used the lab to repeatedly prove that my formula worked. At the end of the week, we were sitting in his office when Jack walked in, having come up from school. We caught him up on everything, and he looked impressed. "Harry, I think there are some things Norman and I need to discuss with you," Jack said. "But if we do this right, your discovery and formula could make you famous." Over the next few weeks, Jack and Norman guided me through the process of submitting a patent to ensure the discovery was officially mine. I had turned 18 just before the school year ended, so thankfully I didn't need my parents involved. Jack also helped me negotiate a deal with Norman to set up a new business to produce the plastic compound. For his help, Jack received a 1% stake in the business. Over the next 6 months, I went from being a low-budget university student to earning what high-end management consultants do each year. Despite the financial success, my life was still focused on university and work, with occasional trips back to my parents' house. I did, however, start doing a few things for myself. First, I took out a loan to buy an apartment instead of renting one. As usual, Jack helped me find the place, and we went through the motions of purchasing it. It was a little further from campus than walking distance, so I needed a reliable car to replace my old 1982 green Mazda 323, which was always on its last legs. We looked around the dealerships and that's when I saw her, a 2010 LS7V Camaro secondhand, but in good condition with low mileage and upgraded suspension. I had to pay a bit more for insurance since I was under 25, but it was worth it. When I got in and started her up, the engine purred like she was just waiting to be driven. Most Saturday afternoons you could find me in the car park washing and waxing her, getting her ready for my next drive. Along with the Camaro, I also decided to spruce up my personal image. I bought clothes that actually fit my thin frame, thanks to my high metabolism, and started seeing myself as more than just a nerdy punching bag for my older brother. The next time I headed over to my parents for lunch, I had the best drive, opening up the Camaro on the highway and getting a few looks as I pulled into the driveway. A V8 is not exactly subtle, so a few people came outside to see where the noise was coming from, including my sister Joan. "Hey buddy, this is a private family gathering," she started but then stopped, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Hey sis, it's just your dorky older brother coming back for lunch." She didn't know what to say. A couple of her friends came over, asking about the car and who I was. They couldn't believe I was Joan's older brother or that I owned such a nice car. It was interesting for once to be the center of positive attention. I couldn't help but smile inside. My mother looked at me and almost cried when she saw my new clothes and the grin on my face. She hugged me tightly. My dad and Greg, on the other hand, just glared at me like they always did. Dad looked upset and Greg looked angry. After that, my father, brother and sister pretty much ignored me, save for a few snide remarks, but they were definitely listening to everything I said. Mom, however, wanted all the details. "No Mom," I reassured her, "I'm still your Harry. I've just had some good luck for once." She had hardly left me alone since she hugged me and was eager to know about my transformation. I explained a few months ago I discovered a formula that's going to change the world. Jack and Norman have been helping me file a patent, which means people will have to pay me to use my formula. Mom was astounded. "But that's not all," I continued. "Norman and I set up a new company to produce the compounds my patent protects. He's given me a 30% stake in the company, and he holds another 30%. We also gave Jack a 1% shareholding, and some international investors have the remaining 39%. So everything is pointing toward it being a huge success." Dad had a scowl on his face. I think he wanted to say something but stayed silent. Greg, for the first time in his life, couldn't find a word to say. "It's only a little bit of money coming in right now," I added, "but over the next couple of years I think it could be quite significant. I'll also get to travel to interesting places to do research." For the first time I had left my parents speechless. They didn't exactly praise me like Jack did, but at least there were no insults or criticisms, which was a welcome change. That week I went back to work and study, happier than ever, with a smile I couldn't wipe off my face. Each month I continued to attend lunch at my parents' house, and while I wasn't fully included in family conversations, things were different. Joan, Greg, and Dad still had no time for me, but Mom and a few family friends seemed genuinely interested in what I was doing. One Sunday, however, I arrived to find my mother looking particularly nervous. I hugged her, acknowledged without too much warmth my siblings and father, and went to say hello to the day's guests. As I mentioned before, Mom and Dad always had different people over on Sundays, and today was no exception. I mingled for a bit, grabbed a plate of food, and went to sit down in my usual spot out of the way to enjoy my barbecue, cooked sausages, potato salad, crusty bread rolls, and some quiet people watching. While I wasn't as socially awkward as I used to be, I still didn't interact well with this crowd, especially those my parents hung around. "Hi, mind if I sit here?" It was as if I had heard the voice of an angel. I shifted my gaze and there she was. If I appreciated my Camaro's color, form, and curves, then the vision before me made my car pale in comparison. She was tall and slim, just under 6 feet, with long, soft brown hair almost down to her waist. Her waist was narrow, and she looked like she had an amazing figure beneath the jeans she was wearing. Her face was cute, with big brown eyes, a button nose, and soft lips. She wore thick-rimmed glasses, but they only added to her charm. I realized she had spoken to me just a moment ago. Ah, sorry, I stammered. She giggled, clearly aware that I'd been caught staring. Do you mind if I sit here? I wanted to eat. Sure, I said. I'm Harry. Diana. Over the next hour we talked about everything: movies, music, my chemistry work, and of course cars like my Camaro. Diana was studying to become a counselor for abuse victims. She loved dogs, not cats, enjoyed sci-fi movies, and was into console gaming. She lived about half an hour out of town, surprisingly on my way back home. By the time we had to part ways, I was smitten. We were still chatting when Mom came out looking for me. Harry. Yes, Mom. She spotted Diana sitting with me and hesitated. Diana, how are you, sweetie? They exchanged pleasantries. Apparently, Diana had recently worked for Dad, which explained her presence at the party. Harry, could you do me a favor? Diana's ride had to leave early because of a family situation, and since you're going by her place on your way home, could you drop her off? Sure, Mom. That's if Diana doesn't mind riding with me. Diana smiled and put her hand on my arm. I'd love to, Harry. Mom looked relieved, and 20 minutes later we were ready to leave. Diana seemed excited to ride in the Camaro, and we continued our conversation on the way to her place. She directed me to a small unit complex, similar to where I used to live when I first moved out. It's not much. 2 girls and I share a 3-bedroom flat. We all chip in and get by, she explained. I could relate. Until recently I lived in something similar, just 1 bedroom and no flatmates. Diana hesitated as we sat in my car outside her place. I had a nice time this afternoon, she said after a pause. For the most part, your family doesn't seem to hold you in high regard, but I saw someone today who still cares enough about them to show up anyway. Diana, that's one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me. There was an awkward silence as the conversation wound down. For the first time in hours, we both realized that Diana needed to head inside, but she seemed hesitant. Diana? Yes. I wanted to ask her out, but I had no idea how. I had never been attracted to a girl like this before, and it seemed no girl had ever paid much attention to me. Next Friday, she said, almost as if reading my mind. Next Friday? I echoed. Yes, Harry. You were trying to ask me out for next Friday to see the new Marvel movie, weren't you? She was looking down at the dashboard, blushing just a little and giving me the opportunity I'd been searching for all evening. Yes, Friday. We exchanged numbers, emails, and the usual things. I wanted to kiss her goodnight, but I settled for an awkward hug. As I drove home, I didn't sleep a wink. By the time I arrived at my lecture in the morning and later work in the afternoon, I was still floating on air. Finally, after a couple of hours, my coworker Norman pulled me aside. Harry, would I be right in assuming you've met someone? Blushing, it all just spilled out. Yeah, Norman. She's beautiful. I met her at my parents' place. Her name is Diana. She's studying at college and lives nearby. We're going to see a movie Friday night. Norman thought it was cute, a kind of puppy love. He teased me about it for the rest of the week but kept me focused. After all, mistakes in the lab could be costly, and my work in process engineering had consequences if done wrong. Diana and I spoke on the phone a couple of times that week, and by the time Friday afternoon rolled around I was so nervous that I called Jack. He had talked to Norman, so he already had an idea of what I was going through. I gave him Diana's rundown for the first 10 minutes of our conversation, telling him how nervous I was about messing up my first ever date. He laughed. It's okay, Harry. Some nerves just mean you like the girl. But you're going to a movie, so it's not going to be too awkward. Most of the time you'll both be focused on the film. Wear your really good dark blue jeans, that white shirt, and the white sneakers we bought you a while ago. And don't forget to brush your teeth and wear deodorant. Just be your usual charming self, you'll do fine. But I'm not charming, Jack. I don't think you see it, but girls check you out all the time. You just don't notice. Just yesterday, a couple of the lab techs were watching you as you walked up and down the lab. Between how you've evolved your style, the fact that you're a young guy driving a Camaro, and the confidence you have in your work, trust me, they notice. It sounds like Diana has noticed too and wants to make a claim before someone else does. That just made me more nervous. But as promised, I picked Diana up at 7 o'clock that night, and we drove straight to the movies for the 7.30 session. We both loved the film. Marvel always does a great job with their stories and special effects. This one also had a good amount of humor, so we laughed a lot. During a hilarious scene where the main character got caught, quite literally with his pants down by his love interest, Diana reached over and grabbed my hand, laughing so hard. When the scene was over, she left her hand in mine and I didn't mind at all. After the movie, still holding hands, we walked to a cafe just outside the cinema. Diana led us to a table, and we ordered Italian hot chocolates. If you've never had one, they're divine, thick like a chocolate shake, only hot, and so rich you can stand a spoon in it. We started talking about the movie, potential sequels, and then moved to more personal topics, what we wanted from our jobs and what the future might hold. I went out on a limb and complimented her on how beautiful she looked: dark jeans, a light blue blouse and navy pumps. Her hair was tied back in a sleek style, and she wore a pair of thin-framed glasses instead of the thicker ones she had on before. The evening only got better when we discovered that we both loved people watching. We spent the next hour making up stories about the people walking by. One couple we imagined as Russian spies trying to gather intelligence about our small town. Another older pair were hurrying home before the curfew at their retirement village. And a young couple who couldn't stop kissing every few steps. We decided they were a modern-day Romeo and Juliet, finding love despite their family's objections. We laughed and smirked, enjoying every moment. After such a great time, I didn't want the evening to end, but it was getting late. I drove her home, and when we got there I did the proper thing, got out, opened her door and walked her to her unit. Diana hugged me, then surprised me with a quick kiss on the lips. It was brief, but the effect was immediate. Diana giggled and stepped back. "Next Friday?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, smiling. "You're taking me out next Friday?" "Oh yes. Wild horses couldn't stop me." She laughed, catching the reference instantly, and we said goodnight. The next few months passed in a blur of weekends and even a few weekday evenings together. We spent a lot of time talking, holding hands and sharing sweet, shy kisses. I got to meet her flatmates, Cindy, a slightly older, conservative blonde, and Dawn, a quiet, mousy brunette who kept to herself. Diana also got to meet Norman, and I showed her around the office. I couldn't help but notice that a few of the girls at the lab stared a little longer than was polite when I introduced Diana. Perhaps Jack was right, Diana might have been staking her claim. We began traveling together often, mostly in my Camaro. I even bought us matching aviators. Her pair was prescription. She felt a little guilty because they were expensive, but I wanted to treat her. "Diana, let me buy these for you," I told her. "Not many people know, but between my patent royalties and the business Norman and I have, I'm doing pretty well. Buying you sunglasses isn't going to make a dent in my bank balance." We did look good, stepping out of the Camaro in our matching aviators, if I do say so myself. We'd been together for almost 2 months and were really enjoying each other's company when dynamics shifted again. It was a Sunday, unlike the usual Saturday family lunch at my parents' house. We were sitting in our usual spot, just out of the way of everyone and engaging in our favorite pastime of people watching while enjoying a little food. Greg came over, waving a newspaper in front of us, trying to get everyone's attention because he thought he had something that might embarrass me. "Hey, mistake, what's this?" he said, waving the paper in front of me. "It must be wrong because you..."